So as we know at the moment, there is a huge push across the UK for more woodland and hedges. And as many farmers know, this comes with numerous benefits, including provision of ecosystem services, livestock integration and welfare benefits, opportunities for commercial produce, and many more. And we'll touch on quite a number of these in today's session. The focus of this webinar is to explore two farmer approaches to management of trees in the farm landscape, and from maintaining and improving old areas of woodland and hedgerows to planting or establishing new trees and creating new woodland or hedgerows. So this webinar is the first in a series of sessions that the NFFN have planned to explore various on-farm practices. So we would encourage you to sign up as a free member of the NFFN, and also follow us on social media so that you're up to date with any of our upcoming events and webinars as they come out. So first we're going to hear from Pete Leeson from the Woodland Trust, who will share his expertise around managing trees on farm. He will discuss the management and improvement of hedgerows, infield trees and areas of woodland, and some of the benefits and challenges that he has come across on the farms that he works with. And we will then watch a couple of short videos from two of our network farmers. The first video covers hedgerow management with James Robinson on his organic dairy farm in Cumbria. And in the second video, we'll hear from Ruth Pybus on woodland management on her farm at Bronhail in Wales. After the videos, we'll be, as I said, holding a panel discussion between our speakers where we'll aim to get through as many questions as possible. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Pete Leeson. Pete is a Suffolk lad brought up on homegrown veg, and who as a youngster learnt to lay hedges on several farms in Norfolk and Yorkshire. He went on to become a chartered surveyor, working on retail, office and land agency in London and Manchester before returning to his senses and getting a job with trees. He has been with the Woodland Trust now for 29 years and manages the Trust's Cumbria treescape, working to integrate trees into farms and commons. He has become really inspired by regenerative agricultural approaches and views every day as a learning opportunity. So Pete, I'll go ahead and share your presentation for you.
Thank you very much. Right. Shall I just get going, Lottie?
Yep, sorry, give me 1 second. I seem to have done something there. I'm just trying to show it as a slideshow. There you go. That's probably a bit easier then, isn't it? Right.
Okay, and you're moving that on for me. Thank you.
Yes.
So good evening, everybody. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I've worked for the Woodland Trust for a long time now, 29 years, and I came into this with a desire to create woodland and start sort of planting trees, mass tree planting. But living in Cumbria as I do, what I found is that the landscape it's a cultural landscape, but it's one that's full of grazing animals and farmers who want to graze and don't necessarily want to plant woodlands, but have engaged with hedges and wood pastures for many people, a long time, and I'm quite keen to do more of that. So I've kind of morphed my role over the years to try and work with them to see how we can integrate trees into farms. And I think this sort of my work has mirrored where we are as a group, which is that we're increasing interest in hedges and trees on farms and what they can deliver. And that's also been mirrored by an increasing amount of research and understanding the value of those features. So perhaps you can have the first slide, Lottie. So the conversations we're having about hedgerows in particular are really interesting. And it covers a whole host of benefits from a hedge. That includes browse, for animals leaning in and taking browse off hedges, leaves which contain minerals, protein, dry matter, shelter, and increasing that's wind shelter and rain shelter, but it's also now shelter in summer heat as well. Soils management, water management, moisture management in field, grass, seasonality, growth either side of hedges, and connections for wildlife as well. So all sorts of benefits that we accrue from hedges. So we're really, I think the research that's going into hedges now is showing the benefits of them. And I'm certainly working with an awful lot of people who are putting new hedgerows back. And I have to say, particularly in the regenerative sphere, lots of regen farmers are reducing the size of some of their big paddocks. They're putting new hedgerows in and connecting up the landscape by putting hedges in. And I think for a lot of farms, from that sort of open aspect that we might have had recently to one where we've got more hedgerows, if that's all you ever did for wildlife, I think it's a really good start for wildlife. Hedges are an incredible feature for movement of animals through landscapes. They're used by bats, for example, for echolocation. They're just fantastic features. So we've been working with a lot of farmers on hedgerows. Hedgerow management, I think the other two are going to speak a lot about hedgerow management on their farms, so I won't dwell too much on that. But the idea really with a hedge is to keep it as dense as possible and almost as low as possible. The more the hedge grows out, the less wind shelter you'll have in the base of it. So trying to keep it low, and traditional management techniques such as hedge laying, like we see in front of us now, is a fantastic way of doing that. But if you have to flail, there are options for flailing which can maintain a hedgerow, so it keeps its thickness, its density, without losing too much of it. A hedge that's managed too tight and too low and continually flailed is just going to get leggy at the bottom and capped at the top, and is not particularly good for wildlife or wind shelter. So finding ways on farms to manage hedges to keep them low and dense is really good. Another habitat which is increasingly interesting for a lot of people up here in Cumbria is the creation of wood pasture. So hedges are one thing. Wood pasture in those permanent pastures, planting new trees into those landscapes, is becoming very of the moment. Shade and shelter are really critical features that they deliver, but also water management on pasture, seasonality in grasses. And interestingly, things like nutrient transfer by having deeper roots and having leaf fall, which provides for nutrient transfer in woodlands. And we've got some fantastic old wood pasture examples in Cumbria that we're working with. And I'm hoping James is going to say more about trees and cattle later on. But these features, the one on the left here is at Geltstale, with older breed cattle utilising wood pasture for shade, shelter and browse. Very good for animal welfare in terms of the of leaf use. And also shelter. So these systems, which are very old, are, I think, slightly coming back into fashion a wee bit. And with payments through the country stewardship system, we're doing an awful lot of wood pasture creation in Cumbria at the moment. These are the ideal for wood pasture is cattle grazing, and an ideal density for trees is somewhere between 30 and 50 stems per hectare, and trying to get these big trees back into the landscape. Very often we've lost or are losing big trees from the landscape, and we haven't been planting or replacing these big trees for the last 50 or 60 years. So very often there's a lack of youngsters in the landscape. But they're fantastic features in the landscape, and they're fantastic for cattle and shelter and shade in particular. Finally, also woodlands. There's an increasing respect, I think, for woodland creation, woodland management on farms, whether it's a commercial woodland, conifer woodblock, or again for integrating with pasture systems. And we're working again with lots of people like the Kingsdale cows you see in front of you now, utilising woodlands for shelter and for shade, and getting those animals into woodlands to manage them better. This is quite, I suppose there's lots of techniques in woodland management which can be utilised, but we're really keen on seeing the appropriate grazing in woodlands, which sometimes could be zero. In other times, it could be quite regular grazing, but these pulses of grazing can be quite good ecologically, and they can form part of the function of the woodlands on the farm woodlands. So for me, there's these three areas of interest, which is hedgerows, hedgerow management, there's a wood pasture element, and then there's woodlands on farms. So in terms of management of all of those features, I would like to see if farmers are able to have an integrated plan. So for example, with hedgerows, we're looking at hedgerow management where we have about maybe a 7-year cycle on the hedges. We have some crop low hedges or recently laid hedges, some intermediate hedges, and some hedges which are more grown out. The grown out hedgerows, that older growth tends to have the berry and the flower on it, fantastic for pollinators. In our landscape, certainly up here, we have a lot of migratory birds that use hawthorn in particular. So those older hedgerows are fantastic for fieldfare and redwing at this time of year. They've gone through, either heading north or south, and they're taking berries, they're taking food from those hedgerows and taking shelter from those hedgerows. So they're fantastic features for wildlife. If you're able to think of the farm as a sort of rotation of hedge years, if you like, so you've got a whole plan for the farm, that's the best way of restoring wildlife on farms. Have that rotation, have some low hedges, some medium height, some high hedges, and think about rotating those around the farm. There's an increasing interest in natural flood management methods, and certainly for a farm looking to work with water, or perhaps one of the rivers trusts or one of the water companies looking forward, we're trying to store more water on farms. And hedges can be a very, very good way. Putting hedges along the slope can be a fantastic way of slowing down the flow of water off land, and can be a very good way of allowing water to integrate into land. So as a soils management and water management thing, a new hedge can be absolutely fantastic in that. And again, we're working with the Lancaster University up here to study the benefits of hedges for water management, and it's being proven that hedges are a fantastic water management option. And finally, I think the research side of things is really ramping up. I was just told this week of Sam Hollick's PhD in Bangor University in Wales. Sam has been studying the responses of lambing ewes to shelter in farms, and it's quite a detailed PhD, but essentially he's saying that lambing ewes are looking for shelter, and they are I think 3 or 4 times more likely to head for shelter in a field than open areas in fields. So animals are selecting shelter preferentially, and I think this is something we should start to integrate into our management of stock, is they will find shelter when they want to. And so there's lots of research behind this now, which is very interesting. The slide in front of you now, sort of our final slide really, is how some of the farmers I'm working with are now thinking about utilizing poorer, wetter areas for growing, in particular, willow as a browse. This farm is in the east of Cumbria. We've taken lots of wet areas, fenced them off, and are putting in willow as a potential browse for the future. And the idea is that cattle will be let into these areas periodically to browse on the willow. And it's a really interesting experiment, because we're taking an area of land that's fluky, it's wet, so we're storing more water, but we're also providing a browse feature which at certain times of the year can be utilized by animals. And all of this will build up to a shelter belt as well. So actually we're providing shelter to the farm too. So thinking about location of woodlands on farms and the utilization of those woods can really help the farm to reduce things like fluke issues, water loss or runoff, and shade and shelter, whilst also providing some fodder as well. So I think there's these areas of woodlands, why you want woodland, why you might build hedgerows, why you might want wood pastures, are all features which we should be looking for. And a final picture there is a Salix kitten moth caterpillar, a beautiful caterpillar. Wildlife comes in when you plant native trees. And we found this one very quickly. Within about 3 months of planting the willow, we found these moth caterpillars on this willow. So wildlife does follow these plants when you plant them. So I think that's a quick roundup from me of the things, the primary things on my mind about these features.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Pete. Sorry for the slightly delays on the video there for the presentation, if that happened. Just technical issues, I guess. So now we'll move on to the Rethink Farming videos. So first off, I'd like to introduce you to James Robinson, our Vice Chair for the England Steering Group. So I'll let James give you a brief bit of background on himself and his farm now before we watch this video.
Good evening all, and thank you for inviting me on tonight to speak. So my name is James Robinson. I'm the 5th generation of my family to farm here at Strickley. We're in South Cumbria, fairly interesting, challenging land, quite banky, quite wet, steep, but it makes it quite interesting. We've got a good amount of different habitats on farm. We've got a lot of native sort of ancient hedgerow, so we've got about 7 miles of hedgerow on our 300 acres, so quite small fields. We've also got 4 acres, 4 miles of walls as well, and woodland, wetland, ancient hay meadows. We've got quite a good variety of stuff. We're organic, been organic for getting on 20 years now, and yeah, we enjoy our type of farming and enjoy being sort of part of the nature-friendly network of farmers as well. So it'd be interesting to see what this video looks like, because I've forgotten what was actually recorded back in summer. I'm sure things were a bit warmer than they were today.
No, they definitely were. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'll try and work out how to not share the presentation. There we go.
Hi, James Robinson, farm at Strickley with my family, just near Kendal on the outskirts of the Lake District. I'm the 5th generation to farm here. We've been organic for 16 years, but we've been nature-friendly farming before that. Every time we see an opportunity to do something extra for wildlife, we try and do it, and it benefits the farm as well by doing so. So I love seeing nature come along to the farm next door to the cows, really, and right in among them as well. So we use the hedges as a boundary across between 2 fields, but they're also the shelter for the cows as well. Everything we do is all as important to the farm as anything else. So the hedges are important as the cows, and the little creatures in the beck are just as important as our son's sheep, or the silage that we make, or the milk that we sell. Everything is important, and we do see the farm as one whole functioning ecosystem. We've got 7 miles of hedgerows at Strickley. This is one we laid last year. Hedgelaying is a traditional way to maintain the life and the longevity of that hedge. It's very important that we do that every 20 to 25 years to get that vigorous growth back up, and get all the new density of the hedge in there, and it's just a fantastic habitat. We've got hawthorn, we've got some elderberry, we've got some hazelnut, we've also got some blackthorn in this length as well, and then we've got some standard oak trees as well, which we always leave in whenever we come across them. Some are planted as well. Hedges are really important for us at Strickley. They are not just dividing 2 fields or 2 crops or 2 groups of livestock, they're also shelter for those livestock as well. So you'll see livestock hiding behind a hedge, or not so much hiding behind it, but just sheltering behind a hedge when there's the horrible wind and rain and stuff. They're just behind here, and it's just like having a roof over their heads pretty much. Then there's also the shelter for the crops as well. So the crop could just be grassland, but it benefits a huge amount from the shelter from the wind and the rain, but then also from the sun as well. We need the hedges for shelter for the crop as well as the animal. And then they're there for a corridor, really, to connect habitats, to encourage sort of a diverse genetic makeup of colonies of bats, say, or other mammals or invertebrates and things that can move up and down between habitats. So they're a real vital corridor for wildlife, as much as they are a shelter for livestock and fields. It's really important that we have this full range of hedges, of hedge sizes across the farm. This here is less than 1 year old since we've hedged it, so it hasn't really got a lot of fruit on it, and it's not going to have a lot of fruit till next summer. But then you look across there, we've got stuff that's been laid 25 years ago, and that is absolutely full of fruit, full of different sizes as well. So we've got this range of a low hedge to a big bushy hedge and everything in between. It's really important that we have the small stuff and the big stuff as well, different habitats, different species, and lots of different fruit all around the farm. We do about 500 metres of hedge laying a year at Strickley, and we've got to do that to get through this 7 miles that we've got every 20 years. It's a very important thing that we do. We do enjoy doing it. It's labour intensive, but don't forget we're not paying someone to come and flail this hedge every year. So we don't flail any of our interior hedges at all, and the roadside ones we do annually for safety, unless we're leaving them to grow up to hedge lay, but even then we don't actually trim them, we don't flail them until February to allow all the birds to get as much of the berries and nuts and things as they can. Farming has sort of shaped this landscape, it's shaped all the way that the fields are managed, it's shaped all the boundaries, and it's really important that we do look after those boundaries by managing them right to maintain this cultural heritage. Without that, without the hedges, without the small patchwork of fields, this landscape would look really, really different. We've really got to look after it. So you can see it's not really just the wildlife that benefits from eating hedges, so there's nothing really growing below that browsing height of where cattle can reach. But they don't really like the blackthorn, which is why you see down there it's growing out. So cattle are really, they'll graze the bits of hedge, they'll browse the bits of hedge that they think they need. So it's full of minerals and stuff, different minerals that they can get from grazing anything on the ground. Do you imagine how deep-rooted hedgerows are? They're pulling up all the different nutrients, vitamins and things out of the ground, different minerals and stuff. So cattle, they're self-medicating really when they are eating the hedge, when they're browsing the hedge, and we're very, very happy for them to do that as well. So it's another benefit from having good, big, healthy hedgerows. No hedges beyond repair. You know, we can coppice off, we can replant, we can hedge lay, we can make the banking back up again where it was that type of hedge. There's lots of stuff we can do. You know, we just need to just make them better really, and there's lots of ways we can do that.
That's lovely to see all of the good work that James is doing on his farm. So just remember, if you've got any questions, do keep them coming in that Q&A box. So next we're going to show our video from Ruth's farm. So I'll hand over to Ruth to give you a bit of an introduction to herself and her farm.
Noswaith da pawb, good evening. Yeah, I'm in North Wales on 28 hectares, and 20 hectares of that is now mostly mixed broadleaf woodland, which is probably quite a terrifying amount of woodland for a lot of farmers. But for us, it's really important. It's really important for creating a really wide shelter belt for our remaining pasture and the farmyard. It gives us fantastic biosecurity between us and neighbouring farms. And our real passion is to have productive broadleaf woodlands, because productive woodland is, in most people's minds, it's like a big blanket of single species, exotic conifers managed in a fairly hands-off way, and then is clear-felled and creates this really negative, really dramatic change in the landscape, which is really not great for wildlife. So we're looking at having, we've planted up on what was previously sheep pasture, and we're working towards converting that into woodland, which can be managed by CCF. So you're really doing regular management, and you're getting a woodland with a healthy ecosystem that's both great for wildlife, and it's also doing a lot of the things that you need a woodland to be productive. So it's hopefully going to manage its own regeneration, pruning, and be a lot healthier and pest and disease resistant. So there's our ambition.
Great, thanks for that, Ruth. I'll share your video now.
I'm Ruth, and here I am at Broadleaf Farm near Abergele, where I'm farming 70 acres, 50 of which are young woodland. The young woodland at Broadleaf is now the basis for our new business, Broadleaf Wales, through which we're going to be marketing our sweet chestnut durable fence posts, quality hardwood timbers, and also acting as a consultancy to share our knowledge. The approach at Broadleaf Farm has always been to farm in a nature-friendly way, but to be really productive. When the land was bought 30 years ago, it was 70 acres of sheep grazed pasture. Now 50 acres of that is young mixed broadleaf woodland. We've retained a circle of fields around the farmhouse, sheltered by the woodland, where we graze a small suckler herd. The intention in planting the woodland was to create a high-quality hardwood resource in a biodiverse setting. We manage the woodland through continuous cover forestry, which means the woodland will never be clear-felled. The periodic thinnings allow light into the forest floor to improve the ground flora and allow a strong understory, which is brilliant for insects and birds using the woodland. The woodland is sequestering carbon as it grows, but when we take timber out of the woodland and plank it or split it for products, those products continue to store that carbon. The thinning also allows the woodland to carry on growing, so its rate of sequestering carbon is maintained. This is our vision for our productive broadleaf woodland. Soon we're going to be able to come into this woodland and treat it like a shop where we come and get the products that we want. This sweet chestnut, within 10 or 15 years' time, is going to be a big enough size that we can fell it, take it to a sawmill and plank it for enduring end uses. 25 years ago, this was a sheep grazed field with lots of little saplings in it. This sweet chestnut would have been about 20 or 30 centimetres tall, and it would have been planted with its neighbours about 2 metres apart. So to do this transition from having a plantation in a field to having a productive continuous cover woodland, the tree has been repeatedly pruned. It's had its competitors removed through 3 thinning operations, and it's had annual grey squirrel control. This is tree number 23. It's a wild cherry. It's been numbered so that when we've come in to do a thinning operation, we've removed its competitors and favoured it for growing on. The best of those competitors, just the thinnings, some of them we've had planked, and this is the result, a beautiful cherry board out of a stem that most people would have decided was only good for firewood. The fact that this cherry was planked rather than burnt as firewood means that the carbon has been captured indefinitely. The carbon held in the biomass of the trees in this woodland was estimated using the Forestry Commission's carbon protocol. In this 3-acre woodland, there were estimated to be about 240 tonnes of CO2 locked up in these trees. Here we are in our new plantation, planted in 2014. At 8 years old, this oak tree is already 8 or 9 metres tall. So we want to grow quality timber, and to do that, we've chosen good land to plant our woodland on. It's important to plant a broad mix of species. A single species woodland is highly vulnerable to any diseases and pests that come their way. Originally on Bron Heil, small ash woodland was planted, which grew really well. Now, of course, we've got ash dieback and it's looking very vulnerable. At the moment, the cattle are excluded from the woodland and we get a payment from the Welsh Government to do that. But ideally, I would like to be able to use the cattle in the woodland. It would have to be to make sure that the woodland wasn't damaged. We need our regen, but the cows can benefit marvellously from the range of forage and shelter they get from being in the woods. Our pasture is all surrounded by woodland. The cows never have face-to-face contact with neighbours' cattle. So as well as being an important shelter belt to shelter the herd, it also creates a biosecurity measure against TB spread. Our priorities for Bron Heil Farm and Broadleaf Wales are to get our existing woodland from the plantation stage into continuous cover, producing quality stems. To get those stems converted and find new markets for that quality timber, and to take one of our pastures and grow trees for food production, possibly for walnut oil.
So really interesting stuff there from Ruth on her farm. So thank you to all of our speakers and the farmers taking part in the videos as well. So we'll now move on to the Q&A and panel discussion section of the webinar to explore in a bit more detail some of the issues that were raised there. And as I said before, we'll aim to answer as many of your questions as possible. But first, I've just got a few of my own to ask. So just one for you, Ruth. How did you approach planning your woodland integration on your farm, and were there any challenges that you found, and how did you navigate those?
In terms of planning it, one priority was to help connect the landscape. So there were already some hedges and there were some other blocks of woodlands that this existing woodland created connectivity with, and also the woodland was planted with in conjunction with putting new hedgerows into the farm, again strengthening that connectivity. And again, sort of, I mean, more and more agroforestry is a talked about subject, and there are lots of different ideas about how to get trees on farms. I guess what we did is what we've got here is kind of like the basic planting a woodland block, and that's been and so the idea was to create a deep woodland margin around the whole of the farm. The challenge is to actually getting the woodland established really kind of depends on what your environment is. So we were on like all right pasture. So the big threat is the competition between your newly planted trees and grassland. And so the real great success of getting those trees established is all about vigorous grass control every summer to make sure that you haven't got that competition. This is getting increasingly important. Planting schemes are really threatened by these dry springs that we're getting. These new trees are quite fragile in the ground. They're in intensive care, if you like, after all the trials have been dug out of a tree nursery and transported and whatever trauma through their planting, and they really don't need that underground competition with grasses. Once the trees are established, the massive threat is grey squirrels. You know, it's an absolute tragedy how much public money and goodwill has gone into planting broadleaf woodland in the last 20 or 30 years. And sadly, you go around the landscape and the fantastic broadleaf woodlands with the productivity and the biodiversity, it's just not there. Largely, establishment has been poor, and you end up with just a birch woodland. The other species have been lost, and then the squirrels haven't been controlled, so you've got birch woodland which is squirrel damaged, and it's not a happy story.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's great. I've got one for you as well, James. So as we could see, there's a long legacy of hedgerow management at Strickley. So can you just talk us through your rotation plan and how you set about developing that?
Yeah, it's our hedge laying rotational plan is pretty much like that looks big enough, we'll have to do it that, and if we get tired of doing big stuff, then we'll do something a little bit younger or a little bit newer. But because we've been doing it so long, we haven't got a written plan. You know, we just get on and do the hedge because we kind of know that's ready to be done at some point in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, and we're quite loose with that really. Some species need laying faster and younger, so like if there's any willow in the hedge, which isn't a great hedgerow plant really at all, but that needs doing a lot sooner than an old hawthorn. And some of these old hawthorn stocks, they're many hundreds of years old, so they're really slow growing anyways, even when you've hedge laid them. And don't forget, hedge laying is really just like a living coppice really. So all we're doing is cutting 75–80% of the way through, ligging it as we call it, or pleaching it, and so it's just creating just that living coppice that gets all that vigorous growth from the bottom and then off the laid stem as well. So we kind of look at each hedge differently and then try and move it around the farm really. So don't lay a hedge all the way around one field in 1 year. Do 1 or 2 sides of that if you're looking to have a square field, and then move to the other side of the farm and do the other. So you're creating this sort of mosaic really of different hedge heights, different maturity, which, like I said in my video, then benefits different sorts of wildlife as well. And then it's good for the cattle to have different shelters and things at different times of year.
Yeah, that's great. So Pete,
oh, I should just add on as well, because someone did actually mention the question. So Pete said about 7 years, and I'm going 20, just because I like a challenge. But we the hedge laying style that we do, which is sort of a bit of a Strickleyization of which is the name of our farm, of Westland Lancashire type of style, which is different from a lot of other styles, and it lends itself to quite big stuff, whereas some of the styles, Midlands and stuff, needs to be a lot smaller. And our style as well lends itself to a mixed species as well, whereas some of the ones need very uniform sizes. Ours, you can kind of just lig it all in and sort of tie it all together with the stakes either side. So yeah, that's why we go 20 years.
Yeah, that's great. I think, Pete, we've had a few questions about grants and things that are available, and just more generally in that, kind of what resources are available for people surrounding woodland and hedgerow management that you know of, and the types of grants that are coming out now. If you could just touch on some of that. If James or Ruth, if you've got any input as well, feel free.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of quick-fire hedgerow questions in there, weren't there? Like how big and how tall is the wrong size and things like that. Actually, it's great to have tall stuff in hedges, old stuff, but the higher it goes, the more you lose the bottom, and that's why some hedges end up being coppiced out to bring back down to the bottom and then lay after that. So by all means, have tall stuff in hedges, but the taller it gets and the more open it gets, the less shelter there is in there. So it's better to have a range of hedges which are at different heights and laid lower. The funding, there is some funding from the Woodland Trust called More Hedges, which is a small grant fund to provide hedgerow plants. So go to the Woodland Trust website and look at More Hedges. We also do More Woods, which is a small woodland grant as well. So there is Woodland Trust funding out there. There's obviously countryside stewardship. Not everyone can get into that because it's competitive, but there are the Hedgerows and Boundaries grants as well in there. And actually the rates have gone up this year, so they're looking pretty sensible again, whereas they were looking pretty poor. Often when you're putting hedges in, you have to double fence. That's a huge expense. So if you're planning to do more hedging, make sure your fences work for you on that bit of ground. If you're going to go for that expense, then make sure they are in the right place, and don't just go for the grant, but make sure those fences work. And make sure they're wide enough. A nice wide hedge needs to be at least 2 meters. And we've worked with people like the Renaissance who've now got 5 meter hedges as well. And if you look at the Brent study, they did some 12 meter field margins as well. So make sure those margins work for you, but they're worth thinking about at different scales, depending on whether you're shelter or browse or just a traditional hedgerow.
That's great. Thanks for that, Pete. It seems we've got a few questions in the Q&A around kind of planting up or repairing hedges for you, James. So I'm just trying to find the correct ones now, but we've had some on do you use native species when you're replanting, and kind of how do you go about doing some of the replanting and repairing hedges?
Yeah, so whenever we're doing hedge laying, we always, there's always thin bits in the hedges. There's bound to be, especially with the older hedges where some of the stocks may have died off over the years. So we always plant up whenever we're doing. If we come across, yes, things that are growing like nuts, hazelnut I should say, and hawthorns and things that are growing outside of the hedge line that we want, then we'll move them. We always have a shovel with us. We'll move them into a spot where it's needed. We've got bits of woodland and stuff around, so there's always things growing in that we can use. If we need to do a lot of replanting, then we buy from local nurseries as much as we can. So try and get the stuff that's actually grown within your county if you can. Don't be importing it from Sussex if you're in Cumbria, because chances are they're not really going to grow very well. But yeah, so some things lend themselves really well to replanting, hawthorn and hazel, but blackthorn and holly are horrendous for replanting. You need to grow in a lot of roots. So just try and find something that is growing really well around you and is growing in your hedge. And if there's an odd species or two missing that you think should be in there, then just bring them in from outside. And always try and put, so if we've got a nice gap and we haven't got a tree that we leave, that we're going to leave because we've come across it, then we will plant a tree in that. And just interest as well, so Pete said about there's not that many trees, in the last 30 to 50 years. A lot of that is because of the flail. So when a chap's going along with his flail topper, flailing the hedge every year, if there's anything growing up there that would have been a nice tree, it just gets flailed off. Whereas in the past, so previous to the mechanical flail, when we were doing this hedgerow laying rotation around the farm, if you found a tree, you would leave it. So that's why there isn't really that age of tree within the landscape. It's just because of the management of the hedgerows. So chances are, hopefully, they'll come back in with the new grant, the SFI standard, which is coming on, and it's requiring 1 tree every 100 meters on average within the boundary, which will help in establish trees enormously.
The other thing is about timing of planting. We should say that. And again, up here, we've got an incredibly dry February now. And I've still got people ringing me up saying, can I have some trees, please? And I wish they would actually start their planting earlier. November's ideal, December's ideal for planting. At least it should go to damp ground. It has a chance for those roots to get down while there's moisture in the soil. Leaving planting into March and April is just pretty disastrous these days. So do try and do it before Christmas.
Great advice. So now I've got a few questions on woodland for Ruth. So we've got one on how important is it having a market for the wood and tree products? Are there non-marketable benefits of the trees, i.e. animal welfare, enough to compensate for the cost of planting and management?
Yeah, obviously there are what we're benefiting from mostly at the moment is those sort of non-timber benefits, so the shelter that the cows have and the biosecurity, and hopefully having stronger ecosystems and biodiversity there. In terms of the markets, native broadleaf timber is something that has lost its market. We've lost our relationship with our woodlands, and the supply chains and the products have been replaced by imported timbers, and so that is something we're going to have to rebuild, which we're actually quite excited about. One thing that we're having no problem selling is sweet chestnut fence posts, because they are durable, really high quality. In terms of the timber, really we're on a bit of a journey ourselves. Quite a lot of the timber that we've planked in the last 2 or 3 years, we've actually used on projects ourselves, and are, I don't know, it always feels like a leap of faith to use one of these boards for something, whether it's furniture or it's a building material, whatever. And each time we decide to take that leap, we're finding the timber is it functions well and it looks absolutely amazing. So more and more we have these different products, these different uses we've made of the timber, and as much as us enjoying it for ourselves, they're fantastic demonstration products for us to have increased confidence in what we're producing, and help people see what the possibilities are.
Yeah, that's great. And then we've got another one, which is, please can Ruth explain a little bit about what she means on rigorous grass control?
Yeah, there's quite a few Q&As on that as well, like rigorous grass control. Okay, so things we get is can I just put my chickens on it? No. Can I mow it? No. So the competition is going on under the ground. It's the roots and the grass it's there in the first 2 or 3 inches of your turf. It's exactly where the roots are of your poor new tree that's trying to compete with it. That grass is really used to being in there, and it's competing for water and it's competing for nutrients. So there's lots of different methods. So the sort of hard labour method is to get a mattock, and you want to give about 1 metre squared of clear ground for each tree. So you're talking about removing that turf for 1 metre squared and possibly going back after 2 or 3 years to make sure that continues to be grass free. The sort of easiest labour-wise method is to go around with glyphosate, with Roundup, and kill the grass. Obviously, we're in a cohort here where a lot of people are not going to find that acceptable, which is fine. So other methods are things like using, I've seen digger ditcher buckets being used to do that mechanical job that has been done by hand. I've seen mounding machines, sort of specialist machines being used on tractor to take the turf off. Also using mulches to mulch out the grasses, a thick mulch to try and mulch out the grass. Whatever method you use, I think anything around establishing and managing woodland, it's choose your method, do it thoroughly, and then keep an eye on it and see if it continues to work. And you're going to do it when you first plant your trees, and then you're going to take maybe 3, 4, 5 years for your trees to be established, and it might be that you need to keep going back and doing that work.
Yeah, that's great. I think we've got sort of one that I think any of you could answer, maybe Pete, because you mentioned this before. How's it the best way to go about planting trees into pasture and to keep them protected from cattle and other grazers? And what method is the best balance of effectiveness and cost of materials work involved?
This is a question that we try and answer every day, and all I can say is it's different depending on which farm you are, which ground you're on, etc. We've got There are a range of different approaches. So we've used everything from fencing off corners of fields with breast wire fencing, so 3 to 4 meters between an intermediate post and 2 or 3 strands of barbed wire. If you've got cattle, that's enough to hold them off. And then often we use a plastic tube with a stake and a tree in those corners. That's one option, relatively cheap and cheerful. You can remove the fence quite easily and reuse it somewhere else. And we have a range of parkland guards. And I've done everything from 25-meter squares with sheep netting and fencing or rabbit fencing, 10-meter squares, 15-meter squares, down to standard wooden cages, which are 3.6 wide, 3.6 meters square, I should say, because that's the length of your average rail, wooden rail, or half that, 1.8 meters squared, and down to weld mesh cages or cactus guards. We use a lot of cactus guards in Cumbria, which are these metal, spiky, really nasty things that cattle don't want to go anywhere near. But the essential thing is plan your tree planting so that you can manage your pastures in the way you want to. So if you mow any areas, make sure you don't plant trees on it. If it's permanent grazing, then that kind of 30 to 50 level's good. So you might use lots of cactus guards across a pasture, or you might plant trees over a number of years using breast wire fencing in a corner. There's all these different techniques. We've tried all of them, and they all have their benefits and costs. So it really is that juggle. Somebody did ask how much grazing you lose when you plant 30 to 50 stems per hectare. I don't think you lose any, actually. I think what happens, if the trees are big enough, you get seasonality in grasses that starts to occur. If you're on a bracken bed, you start to lose the bracken when it started to shade out. So I think overall, there's no net loss of grazing. Instead, you get browse and shelter and water management.
And then we've got a question on which species are more drought tolerant. Can you give a couple of examples? Because they seem to find when they were planting that hazel seemed to be the most affected by the droughts. If you were, because I know you mentioned earlier that was an issue.
Yeah, I mean, we have got weird weather, let's face it, and I'm concerned about climate change, as many people are, and I think we are changing our climate. So those drier periods are not doing some trees any favours. The way to mitigate that might well be to plant sooner in the season. So before Christmas, if you can, get the family out planting on Christmas Day. It's a great Christmas Day activity. If you can increase your organic material on a site before you plant, if you've got a leachy soil, like a sandy soil, try and get some cow muck and things into it first. There are some methods you can use to increase that organic matter, get moisture back in the pasture, and then plant into it. I completely agree with Ruth in terms of grass management, but one thing you can really do is plant the tree properly, i.e. dig a decent hole for it, nice square spade, nice decent hole, make sure the roots are down properly, that soil is aerated and mucked up, and maybe add some cow muck or something at that point and plant it properly. That's going to give the tree the best start possible. Contractors very often use a T-slot. They whack the roots in, they kind of fold the roots in, and those roots are in exactly the same realm as the grass roots. So they're going to suffer most competition. So I think you can plant well and have some mitigation around climate. But if it's a dry period, then watering, so you get a water bowser out. It's not comfortable, but this is the reality we're working in.
And then we've got one that I guess all the panelists could have a go at answering. We've got somebody that's a tree warden in West Suffolk, and they're wanting to encourage hedge and tree planting on local farms, and kind of asking what would encourage farmers who are used to managing large arable fields without many hedges. What do we think would be good to kind of encourage those farmers to look at putting hedgerows and trees back into their landscape? Don't know whether Pete, you want to go first on that.
Okay, so as an advisor, I am always trying to find the best possible ways of integrating trees into farms in a way that people are comfortable with. So we have to approach it at their pace. Trying to enforce it isn't a good idea. So we're trying to tease out what might make somebody tick, whether it's wildlife. That's often not very successful with a lot of farmers, but it could be water management. It could be any range of things. It's trying to find how they tick, and then try and go about it at a pace that those people are comfortable with. And I would love to do lots of things immediately, but if you can do it at a pace where somebody plants even 50 meters of hedge in a year, I can guarantee they will enjoy it and they'll be on the phone next year and say, can we have 50 more meters? So pace it, get the conversation going, and find out what that farm needs, whether it's wind shelter, and in Suffolk and Norfolk with increasing drought, that wind, the transpiration across crops from high winds can be quite massive. So it could be a kind of agroforestry solution for those people. But find how that individual ticks and then work with them and volunteer some time. Go and help them plant the trees, because that's a fantastic way of building a relationship.
Great, and then we've got one for you, James, which was, you mentioned hawthorn, hazelnut, elderberry and oak trees. How do you decide what to plant? And do you have any advice for reading recommendations? And then we've got another one just to kind of add on to that blackthorn creep is always a problem for us. Have you got any suggestions of control measures, e.g. the time of year to cut?
Right, yeah, so what should we plant? Well, just plant a diverse range of stuff, you know, and I will keep elderberry out, because elderberry, yeah, it's a fantastic bird food, and and great and flowers for pollination early on, but it's a crap it is a real crap sort of hedge plant. And if you've got elderberry about on your farm, you will get more, so don't be afraid to just cut that right off, because it will just grow again anyways. Don't ever bother linking them into the hedge, because they're pretty useless as a hedge plant, and they always grow off the coppice anyways. Just adding something in, because someone said about what was best for sort of for winter bird food. Again, just a range of stuff. So yeah, it's great to have hawthorn because you get all them red berries, but then once they've gone, they've gone. And so you've got to think about the pollination as well early on. So like hazel is sort of first on, really, hazel and cherry plum. And then the cherry plum is just coming out now. We just had a couple of flowers hours. Then blackthorn, hawthorn. I've written them down here so I didn't forget. And then I think is it apple, and then dog rose that way around. So you've got all that, and then you get the fruit later on in the year. So you get all that pollination early on, and then you get the fruit. So the more range that we can have within a hedge, the better, really. Reading. John Wright, The Natural History of Hedgerows, is a really good book. But just to learn about trees, and this book blew my mind really, is The Hidden Life of Trees, and that gets you thinking completely different about woodland and trees and the interaction that they have between themselves and between pests and things. So that's by Peter Worleyburn, whatever. But yeah, that is a fantastic book, so I really recommend both of those. Oh, blackthorn creep, that was the other one, wasn't it? Don't worry about blackthorn creep, it's fine, because you just end up with a big wide hedge. So this 5 meter, 7 meter hedge, it's fine, because in 20 years you're going to cut all that back again, and it'll be small again, and then it'll just creep out again and then get small again. So it's fine. It's not over your whole farm. I wouldn't worry. It's great food.
Yeah, I think we're getting towards the end of our time, so we'll maybe just have time for one more question, and we can kind of move on to kind of just closing statements from you all. I'll just try to find one now that we've got here. Let me just have a look. Just trying to find one that we haven't said before. Is there anywhere that I can go to learn how to propagate my own trees for hedges and shelter belts? Has anybody got any experience of that?
In Wales, just very briefly, in Wales, there's a community woodland organisation called Leys, and I know they've had a big project in the last couple of years all about sort of community tree growing and that sort of thing. So they might have resources on their website, Leys.
And I was going to say the community nursery thing is definitely coming up the agenda again. And in Cumbria, we've got 3 or 4 little community nurseries that have just started. It's not difficult, but it is time consuming, and you've got to be persistent at it. So you've got to want to do it. If you want to do it, crack on.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry we couldn't get through to more questions. If there are more in there that we haven't answered, as I said before, we are going to take all of those questions and we will be putting out answers to all of those. We're also pulling together a resources pack. I saw there was a couple of questions on could we share some of the studies that Pete mentioned, and we can put together the list of books that James mentioned as well, and the website that Ruth was mentioning. So we will provide a pack that will be available with the link to the webinar afterwards, so that you've got those resources available to you, as well as the kind of being able to rewatch the webinar. So if I could just go around to ask the panel, what is one thing that farmers should take away from this webinar and can start doing for their hedgerows or woodland right now? James, do you want to go first?
No, go on then. Yeah, yeah. Look after your hedges because people will love you for it, like Pete said. And if we look after our hedges correctly and lay them and manage them correctly, then we can make them immortal, and that is pretty awesome.
Ruth?
Yeah, so planting trees can be really frightening for farmers. We're used to, as farmers, doing productivity on an annual cycle, and suddenly committing lands to something that feels very permanent is frightening. And also there's a lot of, it feels like a dangerous thing in terms of doing something so visual that your neighbours might have a lot of opinions about. So my advice is be brave, do it. Increasingly, I know at least in Wales, there are grants from the Welsh Government that allow you to have very easy access to schemes less than 2 hectares and are very flexible in how you put trees on your land. And also the Woodland Trust has fantastic more wood schemes and more hedges schemes that allow you to plant quite small areas with support, including in some cases you might be able to get help with contractors actually helping you doing some of the planting. So start small, you know, if you're finding it scary, do a little bit, see how it goes, you learn from that, get confident, discover how brilliant it is when you start seeing so many more insects and so many more birds, and see where your livestock likes to be best and grow from there.
Great. Pete?
I'd echo both of those. That's fantastic. Thank you both. So I'm going to put a plea in for the big old tree in the landscape. These are vertical zoos. They are absolutely key to so many species. An oak tree can have 2,300 different things, whether beetles or mosses or lichens or birds or whatever living on them. That's a huge reservoir of biodiversity. If we can just replace, by putting smaller trees every year on your farm, trees that are going to survive to 200 or 300 years old, that would be awesome. Half our canopy of trees in this country are trees not in woods. They're outside in the countryside, and we're losing them at an alarming rate. So if we can just go and replant some of those trees back in our landscape in an odd corner or a hedgerow or wherever, an avenue down the front drive, whatever, brilliant, crack on, please.
Great. I think we've just, as has been echoed by a lot of people in the chat, it's been a really great webinar, so much useful information, really interesting. I think everybody's really enjoyed it and has thought that it's been brilliant to listen to such inspirational people. I can only agree. So I'd just like to thank everyone very much for attending, and thank all of our panelists for your wonderful videos, your wonderful talks, and all of your invaluable information that you've provided to all of our attendees here. And just to remind everyone that, yeah, you will be able to find the recording on the NFM website. If you'd like to sign up as a member as well, our website is www.nffn.org.uk, and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and all of those sorts of things, and our Facebook group to find out more information about our future webinars that are coming up. So thank you very much everyone for attending. It's been really great. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.